Yeah, the Raptors definitely had kind of a quiet offseason, but in some ways it was a very loud offseason because many people were sort of questioning the fit of this roster and just the general direction. We can get into that a little bit later, but first I want to just start off by talking about Collin Murray Boyles, drafting him with the ninth overall pick. What did you think of that pick? I know personally I was a little bit surprised by it, but yeah, what did you think of the CMB pick and what do you think of his fit overall?
Yeah, so being in the city, being in Toronto, going into the draft, a lot of us heard, Noah Essengay may have been the guy, the French prospect who ended up getting taken 12th by the Bulls. A lot of us, he in a pre-draft interview name dropped, I think, Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam as guys his game was like, and it's like, okay, dude, we know, okay. So everyone thought, honestly, the Raptors were going to take him, but then there was some rumblings about CMB and also the connections with Masai Ujiri still being in charge at that time. The connections to Africa and Kamal Malyawatch was another guy, and I was very surprised when they did put the pick in and it was Collin Murray Boyles, but I actually really like it. I think, their bench right now with the backup big rotation of Sandro Mamakavashvili, who I actually met the other day. My school's right by the practice facility. Me and my buddy were walking by. He was coming out of a shoot around thing and he just stopped and we were chopping it up with him. Got a photo. Great, really nice
That's
guy. But
fire.
yeah, yeah, it was actually hilarious because I was joking. I was like, oh, we're gonna run into some Raptors. We were walking by the practice facility, and within seconds, he just walked out of the building. So that was funny. But between him, Collin Murray Boyles, and Jonathan Mobo, I think they have a really versatile backup big rotation of small ball kind of five guys. Mama Kavashvili being a guy who can stretch the floor. Collin Murray Boyles being a guy, even though he's 6'7", 6'8", this guy's an absolute monster defensively. Like he was guarding 7-footers in college, and we know the college game is still so very big man oriented for a lot of teams, and for him to be as good as he was defensively, mostly guarding centers, is impressive. And I think, he's a win now player, and with the direction the Raptors seem to be going in now with like a win now, we want to make the playoffs again because, ticket sales have been not great and that type of stuff. I think getting a guy like Collin Murray Boyles is a good way to help achieve that goal.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I was thinking that they would go Senge there, especially after that interview that you mentioned. So yeah, I was definitely surprised that they passed on him with him still being available, and then Malawatch was another guy that I was thinking they could take because they sort of need another center.
Yeah.
Collin Murray Boyles is an interesting one. I really, really like his game. He was definitely one of my favorite prospects. I can't totally get behind the fit with Toronto. In some ways, I guess I could talk myself into it. The defensive versatility is certainly there, and like you said, he was really one of the best defenders in this class. So for that reason, I think it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, to maximize his skill set, I feel like he needs the ball in his hands offensively, and I feel like the Raptors have just so many guys like that need the ball in their hands to be successful. So I do feel like that's a little bit troubling with this team. But from a versatility standpoint and a defensive standpoint, I think he does fit in really perfectly with this team's culture. We've seen them draft a lot of guys like that recently, and dating back to even like a Scottie Barnes, I feel like that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I do see a lot of similarities with him and Scottie. We'll
Very
see how
much.
that sort of plays out, but it's clear that the Raptors have that type and that almost like do it all versatile forward. So yeah, I like it in some ways, but I'm a little bit concerned, especially with the 3-point shooting perspective. Murray Boyles is not a good shooter by any means, and the Raptors have a lot of these guys who just need the ball in their hands and aren't super good shooters. So a little bit concerning, but definitely intriguing and excited to see his rookie year. Like I said, he was a guy just doing research for the draft I really ended up falling in love with just because of the defensive versatility and then the secondary playmaking. I feel like guys like that are always going to excite me, at least personally. So definitely intrigued to see what he can do as a rookie.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, a huge part of it for me is just the fact that he can come in and give them that small ball five look. And I think that's something the Raptors have kind of been missing. They try to do it with Mobo, and Mobo's great. He's great, don't get me wrong, but he's still, even though he's a bit of an older like rookie last year, I think he was 21. He is so raw and there's still so much for him to work on. But I think having a trio, it's going to be going back to the Nick Nurse days, the Raptors were very matchup based in that time. Some nights Serge Ibaka was starting, some nights Marc Gasol was starting, some nights both of them were starting, depending on certain matchups, right? And I think that's the way they're going to go with the backup center spot. If they need spacing, Mamakavashvili is going to go out there. If they need, just a guy who's just bringing all the energy, it's going to be Mobo. And if they need a guy who's just going to shut down the paint, it's going to be Collin Murray Boyle. So that's the reason I'm so excited now about this pick, is just to see where they go with it and how they use him. Because like you said, when you're watching this guy pre-draft and even post-draft, if you're still watching film, this guy is just so versatile and so exciting as a prospect because he can defend and he's a secondary playmaker at 6'7", 6'8". Definitely very excited about this pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely one of the rookies that I'm most excited to watch this season. Overall, I think this Raptors team is just going to be sort of a fascinating experiment. The next thing with this offseason I feel like we have to discuss is moving on from Masai Ujiri, who's the longtime GM. Super successful, brought the Raptors their first championship. I guess I kind of get why they moved on from him. They haven't made the playoffs in a couple years. He waited a little bit to trade OG and Siakam. But at the same time, the timing was really weird because they fired him, I believe, like the day after the draft or 2 days after the draft, something like that. Yeah, but what did you make of firing him, and do you think they're going to move into a better era under the Bobby Webster regime?
So my thing with it is I was calling for Masai's done great things, even just for the city of Toronto being here. Like he's made basketball, post Vince Carter, post Chris Bosh, he made basketball a very popular thing again in Toronto, brought a championship in 2019. But I was calling for this guy to be let go when he was refusing to trade Pascal Siakam and he was giving up first round picks for Thad Young. I mean, I think he was, towards the end really grasping for things, but him getting fired actually came down to money. Is all the reports, in the Toronto media have said it came down to them just not thinking he was worth the money he wanted. And that's fair and all, but I think, what's the point in letting this guy go and firing him if you're just going to promote the guy who was right there with him the entire time, right? And it's weird to do it after draft night too. You think they would have done it, and especially after you let him make a Brandon Ingram trade. It's a very odd situation, and I think, it was the right time to move on from that era and start something new, because the life cycle of a GM, unless your name is Sam Presti, should not be more than 15 years in the NBA, right? Like, we rarely see that. And I think, it was time to cut the cord, but then the way they did it and the way they just decided to promote a guy who had been there the entire time with Masai was very weird, and it kind of made it a pointless and lateral move, in my opinion.
Well, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was super surprised that they were just immediately promoted Bobby Webster, given that he was really closely working alongside Masai for the last few years. And I mean, yeah, I don't know if this is really going to help them a ton. But yeah, it is interesting that it did come down to money. And I mean, I definitely understand not wanting to pay a GM a massive salary, especially given that the team hasn't been super successful in the last few years and that the team already has a super high payroll to begin with. I think that's something we can get into.
Yeah, top 10 payroll, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know. I saw something today. They're one of the 7 teams in the aprons right now, 6 teams in the first apron and 1 team in the second apron. So that's really interested and a little bit concerning. We can get into that a little bit more with like the roster and how it fits, but that really caught me off guard a little bit. I think the next thing we can talk about, because this was almost essentially an offseason move, even though it happened at the trade deadline, is Brandon Ingram, because we never got to see him play with this team. He was dealing with an injury, so definitely makes sense, and especially the Raptors, they wanted to better position themselves for the draft a little bit, so I can understand why Ingram didn't play. But yeah, how do you see Ingram fit in with this team, and what did you make of sort of the contract they gave him directly after trading for him? It was a 3-year, $120 million deal.
Yeah, so, being, again, I'm going to say it for the 9th time, I guess, being in the city of Toronto, as much as, other teams are the ones I'm supporting, I'm watching the Raptors every single night. And the consistent trend every single game is the fun part about this Raptors team last season, even though they had a not great record and a not great season, they were in almost every game, every single night, but they just didn't have the guy to give the ball to close it out. Scottie's not going to be that guy. He's best suited as the guy setting people up or, being a play finisher. But they tried to make RJ Barrett be that guy. He just doesn't have it. He doesn't have that clutch gene or that killer instinct that I think, all-star players in this league need. And I think that's exactly what they got in Brandon Ingram. They got a guy who can close out a game, who can get in his bag, tween, pull up mid-range shot, bucket. Like, that's what this team needs. And I think, getting him for basically they traded this pen for Brandon Ingram is the way I look at this. I mean, Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, 2 guys that weren't going to be in your long-term plans, and a top 3 protected Pacers first-round pick. What are we doing? I mean, that's not to get back on the Pelicans, but that was one of the worst returns I've seen for a player, despite him missing the entire season or the entire second half of last season, like that was one of the worst returns for a player I think I've ever seen, especially after what we see, you know, a guy like Desmond Bain get during the offseason or whatever. So, you know, for the Raptors to go out and get an all-star caliber player, a closer in Brandon Ingram, that's going to be huge for them. And I think to close out this season, that's exactly what they need.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the value was certainly there with the trade, like you mentioned. I mean, yeah, again, not to pile on the Pelicans or go back to talking about them, but they just really mismanaged that whole situation. They just should have traded him a lot sooner, because a guy who has half a year left on his contract at the trade deadline really isn't going to yield a solid return at all. But for the Raptors, it makes a lot of sense to sort of buy low on him, and he's super talented. We've seen him be an all-star when he's fully healthy and at his best. And I do agree the Raptors lack that sort of go-to scorer. And I do like the fit between him and Scottie Barnes. I think where I'm a little bit concerned is more of the fit between him and a guy like RJ Barrett and a guy like
Exactly.
Emmanuel Quickly, where I don't totally see the vision in that regard unless they eventually make another move. But at the same time, going out and getting that go-to scorer, I think, does make a good bit of sense for this Raptors team that did lack that go-to guy and consistent bucket getter. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I just think there's another move that needs to happen. But for a Raptors team, I feel like the way you're going to really build a championship team, I mean, we saw this back in 2019, is either making a big trade or just drafting exceptionally well. So I respect them taking a swing on Ingram in that regard.
And that's exactly it, right? You know, the Raptors, you know, just being in Canada, I mean, our dollar isn't worth nothing, right? So the fact that, you know, you're trying to convince American players to come to Canada and commit long term to living in this foreign country, because it is a foreign country as much as it is in North America. It's a completely different world over here a lot of the time. So to convince someone to do that is very hard. And to go out and trade Ingram and get that commitment right away from him that he wants to be a Raptor was huge. But I agree with you, man. Like, what are we doing? Why is RJ Barrett still on this team? And I understand, you know, I think a huge part of it is because he's a local kid and he's been so loved by the fan base. But also part of it probably has to do with the fact that he was their big piece in the OG Anunoby trade, which I still look at and think is one of the worst trades in Raptors history. I mean, how can you trade a win now player in OG Anunoby and try to commit to a rebuild and get two young players, quote unquote, that are 25 each? It just doesn't make sense. Then you go out and pay Emmanuel Quickly $32.5 million a season, which has completely, we've seen right now. I mean, Jonathan Kuminga hates the Raptors. The Warriors hate the Raptors because they set this ridiculous market for these players that no one really knows what they're worth. I mean, Josh Giddey getting paid $25 million versus Emmanuel Quickly getting paid $32.5 looks like an absolute steal right now. So I really do think, like you said, there's another move that needs to be made. And I think as much as they're going to experiment with this Ingram and RJ thing, this team's max ceiling is a lineup of Scottie Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, Brandon Ingram, probably, you know, you throw Grady Dick in there as well, and then you have Jakob Poeltl at the 5. I think that is their peak team, and it's not with RJ Barrett, and I don't think it can be with RJ Barrett because, again, he's an isolation-heavy player who isn't that good. I think there is another move that needs to be made for this team to actually reach a ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. With Barrett, I don't know what the team would be off the top of my head. We can always be surprised by these type of moves. I mean, especially in the NBA, I feel like it goes without saying there's been plenty of trades that we didn't see coming. But at the same time, when I'm looking around the league, I don't know who'd really need RJ Barrett, despite him really having a super productive season last year. I just
Yep.
don't know what the value for that type of guy is. And yeah, like you said, I mean, he was really the centerpiece of the OG trade, along with Emmanuel Quickly, obviously. And yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, you look back, I don't think it was, he ended up getting traded in late 2023, but I believe it was like around the 2023 deadline that there was rumors he could have gone for 3 or 4 first round picks, and not to get that return, and instead get two very solid players, but that aren't incredibly high upside guys is just a little bit puzzling. And I do think that sort of relates to the Raptors moving on from Masai, as we discussed earlier. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird fit, and I'm not going to be able to get fully behind this team, even in a weakened Eastern Conference, unless they end up trading RJ. But yeah, do you see a team around the league that you think he would really fit nicely on?
See, before we recorded this, I was sitting there looking around the league and trying to find a team, but I found it so hard to just find a team. The only one that I could really think of, but again, I don't really see a reason for this team to make a move for RJ Barrett, is maybe the Detroit Pistons. I mean, I don't know long term if Jaden Ivey, and he had an incredible season last year, don't get me wrong, but Is Jaden Ivey really going to be the guy next to Cade Cunningham? He seems like he'd be way better suited as a point guard, a guy running the show. So maybe that's a team, but other than these bottom feeders like the Utah Jazz, like I don't really see a team that is going to look at RJ Barrett and be like, this is a long-term guy we should invest in, because, he has in contract negotiations, he's going to have a fair argument to get $35 million. If Emmanuel Quickley's getting 32 and a half, RJ had a much better season than IQ had going into that contract. So, the Raptors have put themselves in an awkward situation with this. And it goes back to, I just think, they mismanaged OG Anunoby. Like you said, that previous trade deadline before they traded him, the Pelicans and the Grizzlies were the two teams that were competing to get OG. And it was rumored both teams were willing to give up 4 first-round picks and young players for OG. And Masai decided, no, these guys deserve another chance. And that's great and all, but it didn't amount to anything. It amounted to a play-in appearance where you lost to the Chicago Bulls. So, it's hard. And I really feel for Raptors fans, because as much as there's excitement to have, RJ Barrett and all these great players on the team, it's a lot of stuff, and it's not really going to amount to anything. And, I know you're a Celtics fan. I know you remember that year, Kyrie's second year in Boston, where, we were all so excited for this team. But, a quote from Marcus Morris that year, I believe it was, because Kyrie was only in Boston for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it was his second year, where Marcus Morris made that comment where he said, we're a bunch of individuals, we're not a team. That's how I feel about the Toronto Raptors' current situation. I just think it's a lot of good stuff, but there's no fit and there's no real, identity. And I think an identity is the most important thing a team can have in the NBA.
Yeah, 100%. I think you really nailed it there. I mean, similarly, I was thinking about something that got said about that Celtics team a lot. There was a lot of shot creators, but there wasn't a lot of shot makers. There wasn't a lot of guys who were comfortable playing off the ball, comfortable spotting up, taking a lesser role, and I do think that could be a similar problem with this Raptors team to a bit of a lesser extent, because obviously they don't have championship aspirations or anything like that, but at the same time I do view that as a potential problem. I did like the Pistons shout there. I thought that could be a good fit, and Jaden Ivey could be pretty nice with this team. I do think he maybe could benefit from a change of scenery. We didn't get to totally see him a ton with that Pistons team last year because he went down with injury midway through the year, and then they really took off after that. I don't think that's a knock on Ivy. That's just sort of what happened, but I think he could definitely be a trade candidate, and that could sort of make sense for both sides. So I did like that point there. I think we can move on. We kind of discussed this, but do you think the high payroll, being a top 10 payroll team in the league, being one of the 7 apron teams is, I think we agree it's not a great idea for this Raptors team due to their ceiling. But do you think it's something that we'll see change? Do you think maybe they'll almost do a salary cutting move with IQ or RJ, or do you think they're just going to sort of ride this out and try to make a playoff push?
Yeah, so, in my opinion, if I sat there and I hopped on 2K and I was rebuilding the Raptors, the way I would go about things is, I would give Emmanuel Quickley a chance. He had a major injury-packed season last year, and I think he is the perfect point guard or off guard to Scottie Barnes. I think, Scottie Barnes really does play that point guard role when he's at his best. He's facilitating, he's setting up the offense. He's the one creating actions. And, so, I think in that situation, Emmanuel Quickley could really thrive off of that as the off guard. And that was the whole idea when they gave him the extension, and he just did deal with a lot of injuries. And I think the cost-cutting move has to be RJ Barrett, but it could also be Jakob Poeltl. I mean, I know they gave him an extension, which again was another head-scratching move for a long-term deal. I mean, I think he's 27 or 28 right now. He's going to be pushing 30 at the end of that, or into his early 30s at the end of that extension. So that was another head-scratching move. But I guess they're really probably just going to wait and see what's going on, but definitely not justified paying this team a top 10 payroll when no one actually knows what they're going to be. No one knows what direction they're actually taking. It's very weird. And I think the issue with it is because, the Raptors are Canada's only team. They're in a situation where there's way more pressure on them than really any other NBA team to have success. And when they go into media day last year and say we're in a rebuild, and then unsuccessfully midway through the rebuild get, so much pressure from the media because they're so bad that they need to go out and make a move. And as much as I like the Brandon Ingram move, they go out and make it. And then, now they're back in that situation where they're a middle of the pack team, which is what they were trying to get out of. And now they just have a bunch of stuff. So it's hard with the amount of pressure this Toronto media puts on a team like the Raptors to be successful, and the fan base does too, because they're the only team in the entire country. and it's hard to, promote losing basketball year in and year out.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about them being Canada's only team, and I agree that definitely puts a little bit more pressure on them. And at the same time, I do think it makes them more likely with just being okay with let's be a solid playoff team, let's go for that. I know that's a point that I've heard a few people say, and yeah, I do think that sort of makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, you definitely nailed it there. They're really sort of stuck in the middle, and they're not exactly rebuilding, but they're not exactly trying to compete. And yeah, I mean, it is just a really confusing direction, and I didn't think we got a lot of clarity on that this offseason. But yeah, I mean, I do think you sort of have to ride it out with Emmanuel quickly, see what you got there. For one, his trade value is probably not super high because of the
Yeah.
contract, but I definitely agree that he is a really promising guard. He is obviously a gifted scorer. Almost won Sixth Man of the Year a couple years ago, but yeah, can really score at all three levels. So I think that's a nice element for this team. But he's also really solid and underrated playmaker in my eyes. So I think that's another thing this team really lacks. And I mean, if you're trading him, you're gonna have to get a really solid point guard in return because you don't have a guy that can really fill that void if he's off the roster. But yeah, I agree. I mean, we talked about Barrett a lot, but I think that's the main trade candidate with this team. Even though he is the hometown kid, I feel like it just sort of makes sense. I mean, with Ingram and Scottie there, and then quickly too, I feel like Barrett would be the logical trade candidate. Podol, I don't know. Maybe they could trade him. What was it like
I don't know
two
who
years
wants
ago?
him.
Yeah, it was like 2 years ago when they gave up their first round pick to get him. Correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that pick was Rob Dillingham. Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah. That's crazy. To think about, but yeah. I mean, they traded the first round pick to get him. I feel like they've always been super high on him because they drafted him, and then he was eventually part of the Kawhi
He's an
deal.
underrated,
Yeah,
like, solid big man, but again, like, the issue comes in with, we see with how valuable rookie scale contracts are. I mean, that's why the Timberwolves were willing to give up what they did to get Rob Dillingham, because they need, with paying guys like Anthony Edwards, with paying guys like Rudy Gobert, paying guys like Naz Reid, paying guys like Jaden McDaniels, they were in a situation where they need to have someone who eventually can be a starter that could still be on a rookie deal. Even in the NFL, like the quarterback, the teams the most successful ones with, quarterbacks on rookie scale contracts. So for the Raptors to not have anybody in their starting five who's going to be making below 27 million, maybe more like 25, below 25-ish million, like, that's ridiculous, and that's not going to be a successful team in the NBA.
yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. I mean, especially in this second apron era, rookie scale contracts are only becoming more and more valuable. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. A little bit of an overpay, extending Podol, but at the same time, I do feel like they need that type of center,
Yeah.
who's willing to, do the dirty work, set screens, roll to the rim. Not necessarily the best defender, but solid in that regard. So yeah, I feel like they sort of need him, and that's why they ended up overpaying. But yeah, at the same time, that's why I thought they were gonna go out and draft Malawatch, especially if he was available. I was
Yep.
surprised that he was even available at 9, honestly, and even more surprised that they passed on him. But yeah, as we talked about with Murray Boyles earlier, maybe he can become an NBA center. He's obviously coming into the league as more of like this Swiss Army knife forward, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if his ideal role ends up being almost a small ball center because he's so strong, so versatile, and he guarded fives quite a bit in college. So maybe that's the Raptors' vision with this. But yeah,
And an idea I kind of want to throw at that, I've mentioned to some Raptors fans I know, is with the Atlanta Hawks right now, there's a ton of pressure on that team specifically to be, good this year, especially with Trae Young, on the last year of that deal, and likely not signing an extension with them. And I know all the reports have said like both sides want to stay together, but they just want to see how the season goes. I think really like a team like the Hawks, if they get put in a tough situation this upcoming offseason, that could be a team where Toronto just goes and makes that move. They give them Emmanuel quickly, they give them RJ Barrett, and they give them a first round pick. And, Atlanta still brings in decent talent, can kind of reconstruct that roster and have a good playoff team. And Toronto can get the guy because they, the issue, and I think we'll probably get into him next, Scottie Barnes, he's not a number one, but you going to have to pay him like a number one because he does all the other things. And he's an elite playmaker at power forward, even though he does play a lot of point guard. He's an elite defender, on at both the rim and on the perimeter. He's a good rebounder, and he can get into his bag offensively. And that was something I really liked from him. I saw so much growth from Scottie this past season. He kind of found his go-to shot, which is that dribble, get into the post and pull it, fade away shot, from the baseline. So I think, Scottie Barnes is such a valuable player, but this team is still missing a number one, and I don't even think Brandon Ingram can really be that guy for this team either.
Yeah, 100% agree. We can get into Scottie in a sec, but yeah, I mean, I like the Trae Young trade idea. Personally, I'm pretty high in the Hawks, so I don't know if it's
Yeah.
necessarily going to
No,
happen.
exactly. Me
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
but if things go wrong, which is possible because Trae Young still hasn't signed an extension yet, despite being eligible for a couple months now, and there's been rumors for a couple of years that hasn't been super stable.
Yep.
If they have a disappointing season and Trae Young becomes a trade candidate, I think the Raptors are definitely one of the most logical destinations. I would say like top three best
For
potential
sure.
suitors,
Yeah.
both in terms of a team need standpoint and asset standpoint. So yeah, I really like that idea, and I think that's something we could possibly see if the situation in Atlanta takes a turn for the worse, which again I'm not expecting, but in the NBA
They
you really
could.
can't rule it out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can get into Scottie Barnes. I know you talked about him a little bit, but yeah, I know you said he's more of that number two guy, but yeah, what do you see in terms of possible areas of growth for him, and then how do you think this roster sort of maximizes his skill set or doesn't necessarily maximize it?
Yes. No. So the 3-point shooting last year, Scottie fell off like his shooting percentages from three were not great at around 27% from three. But that was the whole idea, in the media, Darko Rajakovic just kept saying, no, we're forcing Scottie to shoot threes. We're forcing him to shoot threes. We want him to just continue to get more comfortable with that. I think that's the next step for him. I think, just becoming a guy who can come off the pick and pop and drain a three. That was something we saw Pascal Siakam get really good at towards the end of his Raptors tenure. And I think that's the next step for Scottie. And I think, he's going to be a fringe all-star his entire career, and he'll never be that guy, I don't think, where he's going to average 25-ish points per game and be like an all-NBA first-team guy, but he could still make an all-NBA team because he's going to get you a steal and a half. He's going to get you a block and a half. He's going to get you like 7 assists, 8 rebounds, 19 points. Like, he is one of the most versatile, well-rounded players in the entire league. So I'm very high on Scottie. I'm excited, but with the team construction, there's still not enough spacing around him, and I think that's where the RJ Barrett thing comes in again. Like, if this team was starting Grady Dick at the 2, I would, even though he's not as good as RJ, I would feel better because it's a guy who's not going to need the ball, and he's an absolute sniper from deep, and that's what this team needs. And again, Jakob Poeltl is not a guy who's really going to get in Scottie's way, but he's not a stretch big. He can't shoot the mid-range, so it's tough. I like the Emmanuel quickly fit around him. I like Brandon Ingram. And I don't hate Jakob Poeltl, but again, it just comes down to RJ Barrett, and I think they got to just cut the cord and let him go.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, in some ways, I feel like this team is able to maximize his skill set in terms of length and versatility, but the floor spacing just totally non-existent.
Defensively, they're going to be really good. Defensively, they're going to be fun as hell, and they're going to be very versatile, like you just said. But offensively, it's like, what's really the goal here?
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree. I mean, I feel like just in general, as we talked about with like the Trae Young part of it too, the Raptors have two really solid number two options, but they don't have that clear cut first guy, even with Brandon Ingram. So I do think that's a little bit of a problem. But just in general, I'm a massive Scottie Barnes fan. I'm not just saying that because we're talking about the Raptors. He's genuinely one of my favorite players in the league to watch. Just a guy that can legitimately guard every single position. I feel like his defense gets overlooked a little bit, and maybe it's because the Raptors just haven't been that good of a team on defense necessarily, but I feel like just a guy that can really guard all positions, wrecks havoc off the ball, and then is also a really, really good on-ball defender. Just that type of player, sort of like we were talking about with Collin Murray Boyles, is always going to be an intriguing archetype for me, and I've been a massive fan dating back to the 2021 draft. And yeah, I mean, I feel like offensively, definitely nailed it. I mean, shooting has been the big area of concern for him throughout his career. He had a solid 3-point shooting year in 2024, but then dips back to that below 30% range, which has been sort of where he's been at throughout his career. So, I mean, that who knows if he's ever going to become a really knockdown shooter or even like capable spot up guy. But at the same time, he's really good at attacking the rim. Really, really good playmaker. Like you said, he's like that 6'9" point guard almost, even though he's more of like a forward type. But yeah, just super versatile. And I mean, he does have a solid mid range game, which I think doesn't get
Yeah,
talked about enough
mid-range
for
game
this
is
game.
great.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, I'm super high on him. I just think they need to maximize the roster around him a little bit better. I mean, a lot better, really. But
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, right? If they committed to the tank properly and, they actually, like, again, it's not about the Brandon Ingram trade. It's just about, maybe they could have sold off RJ Barrett, who's having an incredible year at last year's deadline. but they didn't. And if they did that, getting a top 2 pick and landing a Dylan Harper for this team, that would have changed the entire trajectory of their future, because you would have finally had, a true number one, a guy who can come in and eventually be like a 22, 25 point per game scorer at guard. And that's something this team needs, but they just didn't do it. And the NBA is in a world now where, we do see stars get traded, but it's not always the stars that teams want. And it's going to be tough for the Raptors to figure things out. I'm excited for this year, but at the same time, there's so many question marks with this roster.
Yeah, most certainly. I definitely agree with that. I think we can sort of move on to our
Yeah.
breakout player for the Raptors. Who do you got here?
So I have, Canadian kid, AJ Lawson. He had a good end of the last year's season. He averaged, I have the numbers here, he averaged 12.6 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 2.1 assists over his last 7 games there. He shot 36% from 3. He was incredible in Summer League. I don't know if you got to see him while you were down there, but he was lighting it up in Summer League. Like the whole Raptors Summer League unit was lighting things up. And, as much as I want to say a guy like Jamal Shedd or Jonathan Mobo or Jacoby Walter, I think, if Lawson gets the opportunity, he can be an absolute sniper off the bench for this Raptors team. And I think he's going to get that +5 attribute that we see all the guys get when they're playing in their hometown. So that's my guy.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, this Raptors team quietly had a really, really solid rookie class. I mean, you mentioned
Yes.
Shedd,
No, I think one of the
Mobo,
best in the league last year for sure.
No, absolutely. And I think talking about it earlier, I mean, this was a sneaky fun team to watch. They were always close and competitive in these games. And a big part of it was these rookies really making a high level impact despite not having a lottery pick even. They were able to find 4 really intriguing rookies. And yeah, it does make me think like I wish we got to see this Raptors rebuild like totally committed to it. But
Yeah.
that's all right. But yeah, I think that's a really good pick there. I mean, they're just going to need a guy who can play off the ball and can really knock down threes at a high level. So I think that makes a lot of sense. For sort of a similar reason, I'm going to go with Ochai Agbaji. I think he gets a little bit overlooked with this team, but he's just the perfect guy that they need, and a guy that can really fit in with any team's needs. And I mean, just having that 3-and-D skill set allows you to make an impact regardless of what team you're on, but especially for a Raptors team who needs off-ball play, I feel like that's going to keep him on the court and get him some big minutes. We saw him have a really career best season last year. Started off a little bit slowly as a former lottery pick in 2022, but he seemed to find his groove nicely with the Raptors last year, and I think we're going to see more of the same. And I think playing with a fully healthy team and Ingram in the mix, he's just a guy that benefits from playing alongside other great players. So I feel like that will help him, and he's going to have a bigger role than a lot of people are anticipating.
Yeah, no, I love the Ochai Agbaji show, man. I mean, that guy had just a good year last year. And another underrated part about his game is just how good of an athlete he is. Like, I've seen him live a few times last year, and he rocks the hell out of the rim. So I love that. He, like you said too, he's a guy every team would want off their bench or even as like a starter in smaller roles, So yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, for sure. I think he definitely gets a little bit overlooked, not just with this Raptors team, but in general, and someone that I'm expecting to have a big role on this Raptors squad this year. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up here with our over-under win projections. 38.5 wins, and then, yeah, where do we see this Raptors team stacking up in the East as well?
Yeah, 38.5 is kind of, especially with how weak we're probably both expecting the East to be. I think that's really high at 38.5 to have that as the line. I might take the under on that. I think this is going to be a 38, 37 win team, and I have them anywhere from 8 to 12 in the Eastern Conference. It depends on a lot of things, and also, kind of like the Pelicans, the Raptors were so injured last year and had so many guys banged up, and I think that's what it's going to come down to. I have them, in that similar range to teams like the Chicago Bulls, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I mean, I guess we'll go slight under again. I mean, literally like 37, 38 wins, I feel like is fair. I wouldn't be shocked if they, get to
No,
the
I wouldn't be
500
shocked
range.
either.
Yeah, like I feel like I say this every segment. I do this season preview, and when we get to the over under lines, I'm like, damn, that's a good line.
Yeah.
I mean, Vegas knows what they're doing there. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'll go slight under. I've been hammering the overs for most of these season previews, so gotta get a couple unders in here. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I do feel like the ceiling for this team, maybe they can make a 7 seed, and then yeah, the floor would be just outside of that play-in. I mean, they were low-key kind of close, and I feel like if they wanted to, they could have made the play-in
For
last
sure.
year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I do see this as a play-in team. I would be pretty surprised if they end up getting a top 6 seed, but I mean, who knows? I think one thing that we haven't really talked about is Darko Rakovic. He's sort of, we haven't seen a ton of him as a head coach. He's only coached for 2 years, but at the same time, the sell on him was really an offensive mastermind, a developmental orientated coach, and I feel like that could potentially help this Raptors team. So maybe that's an underrated aspect that could take them to the next level. At the same time, I can't see this team being a top 6 seed, but who knows? I could be proven wrong. I have them sort of penciled in as that 10 seed right now. I mean, in the East, you look at the Celtics and the Pacers. I feel like those are two other teams I see in the play-in. And then a team like Miami, I also see in the play-in. I know we did the Pacers a couple weeks ago, and I think they had the same exact line as the Raptors, which it's a little interesting in my opinion.
I would definitely feel way more comfortable probably taking Indiana's line. I'm expecting. I was kind of sad to see that was already done because I'm a huge Andrew Nimard guy. I think he's going to be a potential All-Star this year. So, yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, Nemhard's going to have a massive year. But yeah, how would you sort of project the plan in the East? Because I feel like it's wide open. I mean, you could maybe even personally, I'm not a big Philadelphia believer, but you could definitely make the case for Philly. You could make the case for a team like Chicago, who seemingly every year finds themselves in the play-in. But yeah, who do you envision as sort of those 4 play-in teams in the East?
Yeah, my 4 teams would be any sort of combination of, the Chicago Bulls, the Indiana Pacers, Boston Celtics, and then the Raptors. I think any combination of those 4 teams, maybe you sprinkle in the Heat. But I do think Miami, I'm hoping Bam actually, wants to play basketball this year and actually, wants to remember he's 6'9" and he's not 6 foot tall. But hey, that's his decision, right? But I really do think the Heat will be a little bit better than all 4 of those teams I just named. So, I have the Raptors around the 9th seed, 10th seed maybe. I wouldn't be surprised if they're a 6th seed though. That's how wide open the East is to me. Like, it's so random. I think outside of like the top 4, you're kind of in a spot where it could go any sort of way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the Cavs, Knicks,
Yeah.
Magic, I feel like that's the clear top 3. And then from there, who knows, Pacers, Pistons, Bucks. I
Atlanta.
mean,
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe there's some big Philly fans out there.
Yeah,
I
maybe
understand the
Philly,
optimism,
I
but
wouldn't be opposed, but again, Joel Embiid, I can't trust that. I
I can't
can't.
get out there from a health standpoint. I have them outside of the plan right now. But yeah, I mean, Miami, that was all, yeah. I mean, I think they could be potentially a sneaky good team. We saw them sort of come alive
Yeah.
at the end of last season, despite really having an up and down season. So yeah, I mean, you could talk yourself into a lot of these teams, but I think that's sort of the excitement of this Eastern Conference, although it is certainly weaker than the West this year. But yeah, unless you have any closing thoughts on the Raptors, I think we can sort of wrap it up here.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, man. It was an absolute blast. I'd love to come on again or maybe connect on my platform or something. That would be great. So this was great, man. I appreciate it. It's good talking hoops with someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Have to have you back sometime during the season. But yeah, before we
Sure.
wrap it up officially, I just want to give you a chance to plug your work to the listeners. Tell them
Sweet.
where they can find you at.
Yeah. So on Instagram, the Spark Plug, on TikTok, the Spark Plug, that's just like my little passion project. I haven't posted in a little while, but just do like little 10-second blurbs about, things I'm watching in the NBA, especially college basketball, big college basketball guy. And then, Pelicans Debrief is where you can find all my writing work if you're interested in anything like that. So, yeah, just keep a lookout. You can connect with me on LinkedIn too, Chris Lambert on LinkedIn. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Appreciate you coming on the pod. It was a ton of fun, and catch you guys on the next episode. All right, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Cassels Cast. Once again, huge shout out to Chris for coming on the show. Make sure to go check out some of his work. But we're going to wrap it up here. We'll be back next week with another season preview. I'll catch you guys on that next episode.